Good morning, everybody. We see participants streaming into the session, which is exciting. Morning, Toby. Nice to see you here.
Morning, everybody. We have quite a number of people registered that are streaming in, so we'll give it about 10 more seconds, and then we'll begin. Welcome, everyone, to the first event in the Clean Recovery Breakthrough Series. I'm Toby Heaps with Corporate Knights. Also on your screen is Elizabeth Shirt with Globe Series.
Morning.
Today we'll be your co-hosts for the event. This is the first Clean Recovery Breakthrough event that we're doing as part of a series. And the series is aimed at bringing thought leaders from across the country together to shape the moment of transformation that Canada has found itself in. Together, we will identify industrial breakthrough opportunities that reduce carbon, attract investment, and create jobs. Our event here today is the first in a series of on an important topic, scaling Canada's nature-based solutions. Who, what, and how. And we're happy to have with us today as well a supporter of the event and sponsor, Shell. Before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. But beyond the acknowledgement, we'd like to invite everyone here today, and we have a lot of people here from big companies and big governments and organizations with big megaphones. We'd like to invite everyone here today to do what you can do to help build an economy that respects the sentiments of this acknowledgement, specifically in line with the 5% of Canada's population that is made up of Indigenous peoples. We would like to invite everybody here today to do what you can so that 5% of your procurement spend is with Indigenous businesses. And we're happy that the federal government has already joined in this aspirational commitment. We'd also like to invite everybody here today to consider how you can shape your leadership structures going forward so that 5% of the people who lead your organizations are Indigenous in line with our population. And for the federal government, we're happy to have with us the minister today. And we would like the federal government to consider what it can do to support Indigenous communities and businesses to really partake and make equity investments in this green economic recovery that we're about to undertake, which will include generational investments. And I'm talking about lending the balance sheet of Canada so that Indigenous communities can have access to capital to make those equity investments, including through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which presently requires a little more direction on that front in order to be able to act. Over the next 60 minutes, we're all here together, and we'll hear from the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, followed by a host of expert actors in the nature-based solution space. And then we'll be flipping it to you. We'll hear from a few of you who will be joining us on screen as people's panelists, is selected through the registration process. And over this time, we'll also welcome your questions through chat or within the Q&A. Please be sure when you're sending your questions that you select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your questions. Now we'll go to a framing poll. We can put the poll up on the screen. We'd like to get your take on how important a role nature-based solutions play in achieving our climate action goals. So we'll give a few seconds for everybody to select your options. Give it another few seconds, maybe 10 more seconds.
I hope I'm allowed to vote because I did.
Oh, yeah, I better vote. Okay. Okay, so extremely important. We have a bit of a self-selected audience, but it's a large audience from many of the critical economic actors in this country. So that it ranks as extremely important by 2/3 is telling. It's also in line with a major study that was published today in the journal Nature, which found that if we were to globally rewild 15% of the land that has been unwilded, that would remove 30% of the greenhouse gases that we've deposited in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, and would help to reduce species extinction by about 60%. Here in Canada, we've done some work looking at what kind of capital spend is required over the next 10 years to decarbonize the economy, including nature-based solutions. And of this sort of almost $800 billion, most of which would be coming from the private sector, required over the next 10 years, about 22 of that billion is within the nature-based solutions, and that's in the agricultural and including forests as well, and things like wetlands. And so it's only 3% of that 800 billion, but it represents 15% of the greenhouse gas reductions, and that's using conservative models on the greenhouse gas sequestering of forests. So it's a sort of 5-to-1 extra bang for the buck than the average greenhouse gas reduction, and that's before considering all the biodiversity benefits. So with that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed minister, and who really embodies the ethos of this series in terms of bringing together the innovative power of business to tackle environmental solutions and create economic opportunities in so doing. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Minister.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. I'm certainly pleased to join here from my home and my riding of North Vancouver. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land from which I am joining is the ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I would like to thank Globe Series and Corporate Knights for inviting me to talk a little bit about scaling Canada's nature-based solutions. We are certainly living in extraordinary times. The COVID-19 pandemic has created tremendous loss and tremendous uncertainty here in Canada, but certainly all around the world. It has magnified a number of systemic issues and certainly a number of long-term inequalities. Our government's top priority through these past months has been and continues to be the health, the safety, and the well-being of all Canadians. This includes supporting Canadian families to ensure people have the resources to put food on their tables, but also supporting Canadian businesses to get through this very difficult time. Without question, the world has changed as a result of the pandemic, but certainly some things have not. Before the pandemic, we were already experiencing the effects of two simultaneous other crises, the crisis that is climate change, and of course, the increasing loss of biodiversity in this world. Just a few weeks ago, Vancouver had the distinction of possessing the worst air quality in the world, that as a function of a lot of the fires that were going on south of the border. And biodiversity certainly continues to collapse at an unprecedented and at an accelerating rate. On average, the world has lost 60% of its mammals, birds, and fish since 1970. Canada is in quite a unique situation. We are one of 5 countries that hold 70% of the world's remaining wilderness. Those things have not changed as a result of COVID-19. While the government's top priority will continue to be fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, we obviously also need to be working to address other threats, and particularly other long-term threats that we know are coming at us. Canadians, I believe, expect that their governments can both walk and chew gum at the same time. We have an opportunity at this time to reflect on both the challenges and the opportunities we face as a society. We can look to create an economy and a society that is stronger, more resilient, and more sustainable than it was before. We can address the climate and biodiversity crises in a way that support short and long-term economic recovery and that address these existential issues. However, to do so, we will need to take decisive collective action. You are all here today because you understand the urgency of climate action. To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to get to a net zero space by 2050. And to get there, science is telling us that we must all increase our level of ambition. Our government has committed to exceeding Canada's current 2030 Paris Agreement target and to legislating the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. To get there, we will need to address all sources of emissions, buildings, transportation, industry, and more. And we will need to do so in a thoughtful manner, a manner that reduces emissions across the country, but also creates jobs and economic opportunity for Canadians. We certainly know, as Toby was pointing out, that in order to achieve our climate goals, we have to recognize how climate change is intrinsically connected to nature and to biodiversity. There is a fundamental link between nature, a stable climate, and human well-being. As stewards of the second largest landmass, a fifth of the world's fresh water, and the longest coastline in the world, we understand the leadership role Canada must play in protecting biodiversity and nature. That is why we made the single largest investment in conserving nature in Canadian history, the $1.3 billion Nature Legacy Fund. This fund is helping us to meet our targets to conserve a quarter of our land and a quarter of our ocean in the next 5 years. Last week, Prime Minister Trudeau announced that Canada has joined over 25 other countries in the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People to advocate for the protection of 30% of the world's land and oceans by 2030. And in fact, I was on a call with all of the various ministers of the environment in the High Ambition Coalition just this morning. We have already exceeded our 2020 goal to protect 10% of Canada's oceans and are on our way to achieving our terrestrial target of 17% protection. But obviously we have more to do to achieve the 30% by 2030. Since 2015, we have protected an area almost 3 times the size of Nova Scotia. Indigenous leadership has played an important role through Indigenous protected and conserved areas. We're supporting Indigenous conservation across the country. Certainly Canada's parks and network of protected areas also play an important role. As the panelists you will hear from today will tell us, the potential for nature-based solutions is significant. Studies estimate that nature-based solutions could provide up to 1/3 of total CO2 reductions required by 2030 to contribute to the goal of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Nature-based solutions help not only with climate mitigation, but adaptation too, particularly for coastal communities. They also enhance biodiversity and ecosystem services, improve human health and well-being, and create more green spaces. Wetlands soak up floodwaters and help to increase water supply for farmers in cities. Mangroves and coastal seagrasses and salt marshes can protect us against storm surges. Peatlands, old-growth forests, and intact grasslands across the country store vast amounts of carbon and continue to sequester more from the atmosphere. Nature-based solutions are an important part of Canada's approach to fighting and adapting to climate change and addressing the biodiversity crisis. Our government has made it a priority to actively support nature-based climate solutions that can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also help us to adapt to climate impacts. Canada has one of the world's largest storehouses of carbon in nature. We need to do more to protect carbon that is in place in a way that also helps biodiversity both in Canada and around the world. Certainly, Canada is active internationally, leading the Nature-Based Solutions Action Track together with Mexico for the Global Commission on Adaptation. This work aims to further the power of nature-based solutions for building resilience to climate change. Governments also have an important role to play in advancing nature-based solutions, but it is clear we also need involvement from the private sector. In this regard, we've partnered with AXA Insurance and Ocean Unite to develop the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. The Alliance is developing innovative financial approaches for greater private investment in nature-based solutions. This includes, for example, seeking to scale insurance products as a means of protecting coral reefs that will in turn protect communities from extreme weather events. And more broadly, we are looking at how to accelerate private investment in nature-based solutions through the Global Commission on Adaptation. I am sure we're going to hear more about potential solutions during the discussion today. We certainly have much more work to do, increasing awareness and know-how and accelerating action. We need to integrate our thinking to maximize the benefits for nature and the climate. Here in Canada, we're going to need cooperation amongst various levels of government, Indigenous governments and communities, environmental organizations, and all sectors of the economy to ensure that we leave a healthy planet for future generations. Today's discussion is extremely valuable and extremely timely. I want to thank you all for your engagement in spending time here today. Collectively, we have an opportunity now to build a better and a greener and a more prosperous future for our children and for our grandchildren. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Minister Wilkinson, for your remarks and for beautifully setting the stage for the rest of the hour we'll be spending together. And good morning again, everyone. It's my pleasure to move us into the expert panel portion of our session. I was thrilled to see in the chat we have over 400 participants joining us this morning, ranging from Langford, BC, territory of Beecher Bay First Nations, Wakefield, Quebec, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, all the way to Halifax, Nova Scotia, traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. So it's just a thrill to see such a great group joining this morning and interested in moving forward with nature-based solutions and how they can help address climate change. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our expert panelists that will be joining for the rest of the morning. And so as I call their names, they're going to be joining me on screen. I'd love to start by introducing Chief Marilyn Slett. Chief Slett is the elected Chief Counselor of the Heiltsuk Tribal Council and is President of Coastal First Nations. I'd also like to welcome Denise Chang Yen. Denise is Manager of Nature-Based Solutions for Shell Canada. Good morning and welcome, Denise. Aleister Hanley, President of Radical, joining us this morning. And finally, Roy Brook, Executive Director of the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. You're also going to see, I'm going to call our wonderful tech folks in the background to introduce our people's seat. A little bit later, we'll be filling that seat with members of the audience that'll have the opportunity to join our expert panel and engage alongside them, and that's when things will really get exciting this morning. But before we bring in our people's panelists, I am going to turn to our experts and invite them to provide brief remarks to set the stage for what the who, what, and how of nature-based solutions means to them. And to start us off, I feel privileged to introduce a short video first and opening remarks from Chief Marilyn Slett. And so if we could please play the video for our audience, we'll get things going. Chief Slett, it looks like we may not have audio for that video, so maybe as the video is playing, I'll just invite you to share a few words about the who, what, and how of nature-based solutions for you and your people.
Certainly. I want to thank you for inviting Coastal First Nations to be a part of this very important conversation today on nature-based economic solutions with you and all of the participants joining us virtually. I also want to acknowledge all of the members on the panel. It's really good to be here virtually with all of you. Certainly also would like to, acknowledge Minister Wilkinson. It's good to see you. So the video that's running right now is a snapshot of our lands, waters, and the people. And it gives you an idea of why we are working so hard to protect our territories. Coastal First Nations occupy the Central Coast, North Coast, and Haida Gwaii. CFN is an alliance of communities that includes the Awikino, Heiltsuk, Kitasoo-Hehe, Newhalk, Gitgat, Metlakatla, Masset, Skidegit, and Gitxaala. And combined, we have approximately 20,000 members. Coastal First Nations was created with the conviction that if a conservation-based economy was to succeed, our active and meaningful participation is essential. As a result of several groundbreaking agreements with British Columbia, we were able to reduce the amount of logging occurring in our territories and to protect the biodiversity of the Great Bear Rainforest and to begin that process of rebuilding the coastal economy. So what might surprise a lot of people is that we have emerged as world leaders in the sale of carbon credits. Our carbon credits make it possible for the BC government operations to be carbon neutral. The sale of carbon credits offers us the potential for sustainable economic and social development while helping to conserve the largest and most ecologically significant temperate rainforest in the world. The carbon credit revenues have been used to create jobs in forestry planning and stewardship, management of conservation and biodiversity areas, marine use planning, and investment in sustainable industries. At the same time, it represents an unprecedented opportunity for companies and organizations to demonstrate a strong commitment towards addressing the climate impact of their operations in a meaningful way. By purchasing high quality carbon offsets from the project, you can support the protection of the world's largest intact temperate rainforest and invest in a conservation economy that balances ecological integrity and human well-being. You saw from the video the beautiful, territories of all of those communities that, that I spoke about. And it drives us to do the work that we do, to protect it, so we all can enjoy, a healthy ecosystem that will sustain us in the years to come. I want to thank all of you for providing me with this opportunity. Kayexika.
Thank you so much, Chief Slett, and the imagery in the video was absolutely beautiful. And actually, I loved having you speak to your personal experience as we got to see those images. So thank you so much. Next, I have the opportunity to introduce Denise from Shell, who will speak to her perspective on who, what, and how for nature-based solutions. Over to you, Denise.
Thank you, Elizabeth. First, I would just love to say that I am also moved by the photos, the video from the Coastal First Nations project, and I find it always inspiring to see pictures and videos. So thank you for sharing that with us. I would also like to just take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Blackfoot people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which is where I'm located today. So I'm in Calgary, which includes the traditional territory of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley First Nations, and also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So again, thank you to Globe and to Corporate Knights for organizing this important conversation today, to Minister Wilkinson for kicking us off with such inspiring words, and to the rest of my panelists. So again, my name is Denise Chang-Yen. I lead Shell's nature-based solutions business in Canada. I'm part of our global team. Now, you may be wondering, why is Shell even interested or thinking about nature-based solutions? Shell has a history of contributing funds or leases to conservation activities. We've done so in Canada for quite some time. But today I really want to talk to you about how can we invest in protecting our ecosystems by enhancing or restoring some of them. So it's more than philanthropy and it's more than government funding. It's about how can we scale up this investment. And you may be wondering, why is Shell even interested in this? Shell as a business has announced its ambition to be a net zero business by 2050, and we've got interim targets to get there. So every year we commit to making improvements on getting our carbon intensity lower, and our executive compensation is tied to this, so we take this quite seriously. So that's why you've seen a shift in Shell's portfolio, so that we're investing in renewables, in energy storage, in electric vehicle charging, biofuels, and so on. We know that we need to shift the carbon footprint of our suite of products that we offer to our customers. The challenge for us today is that some of these technologies are going to take time to scale up, and we need some solutions that we can offer today. And nature-based solutions is one of those opportunities. It's a near-term opportunity that can be offered at scale. And we do this in partnership with our customers because we recognize that our customers still need to use a lot of the fuels that we're selling today, because there are going to be some sectors that are harder to decarbonize. We're actually using nature-based solutions to offer carbon neutral products to the market, to our customers who want to decarbonize, who want to be a part of the climate solution, just like Shell. We want to do this in step with the Paris Agreement, with society, in order to make these investments. And what enables these investments is the right regulatory frameworks in order to make an actual investment. So I'm talking about carbon markets, and I'm also talking about the actual government regulations and protocols that help to quantify how much carbon reduction do you get from this activity or that activity. Having scientific rigor around how we approach that is the way to ensure that we have public confidence in these projects, to make sure that people don't think they're just hot air. So this is why Shell is investing in nature-based solutions, and we want Canada to be part of that solution, because as Minister Wilkinson said, we have a lot to offer. Not only the natural landscapes that he spoke about, but we have know-how in terms of carbon markets. We've had functioning carbon market already in Canada for quite some time in Alberta. We tried it in BC, and certainly the federal government is leading on the output-based pricing system. We need to get these frameworks in place so that we can invest. And then last but not least, I also want to speak to the potential for true Indigenous involvement and participation in these projects. They have a lot, Indigenous communities across the country have a lot to contribute in terms of offering their perspectives on how to manage these projects effectively. And it is an opportunity for us to be true partners in projects. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Denise. Really appreciate your remarks. And up next, I'd love to move to Aleister Hanley with Radical, your who, what, and how perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us today. Like Denise, I'm also in Calgary, and also acknowledge the folks, the Blackfoot and Treaty 7. But I will stand by Denise's acknowledgement and work under hers, just in the interest of time. As I said, my name is Aleister Hanley. I'm the president of Radical, and I've been fortunate enough to be working in Canadian carbon markets for over 15 years. And we've been a leader in carbon markets in many ways, and that leadership role that Canada has taken has actually resulted in me taking on an advisory role to the World Bank in the operationalization of Article 6, and it's landed me a seat on the steering committee of AIDA's Natural Climate Solutions Market Initiative, which is to drive markets for natural climate solutions around the world. And this has all been made possible because of the leadership role that Canada has taken. And my perspective on markets is that they work, and they work extremely well to incentivize action to reduce or remove greenhouse gas emissions. And to give you some context of what's available to people who participate in the market is since 2008, I would estimate that we've put close to $100 million onto the bottom line of our clients' financial statements that have participated in these markets, either by generating carbon credits or by purchasing these credits. And it simply works. And what we see right now in natural climate solutions, and what concerns me in the space, is the inclusion of the agricultural sector globally and giving them the opportunity to participate alongside initiatives like afforestation, avoided deforestation, avoided grassland conversion. And we have experience in those sectors today where we're working in Brazil on a regenerative agriculture, avoided deforestation. In the States, we're looking at the agricultural sector for increasing carbon sequestration through cover crops and no-till agricultural practices. And in fact, in Canada, I'm pleased to announce that we're initiating, with the help of our partners, the first avoided grassland conversion project that we know of in Canada with the Climate Action Reserve out of the US. And it was CAR's investment in a protocol, time and money that allows us to quantify these emission reductions that's enabled us to open up this new market in Canada. And echoing on the comments that Denise made, that's what we need. We need market infrastructure. We need a framework that works, and we need protocols that we can use to quantify these emission reductions. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Aleister, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite Roy from the MNAI Municipal Natural Assets Initiative to talk about the who, what, and how of nature-based solutions from his perspective. Roy, over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and to everyone who's listening. I'm joining from Victoria, which is Coast Salish territory of Lekwungen people. I'm going to take about 3 minutes and just tell you what municipal natural asset management is, why it matters, and what's happening with it here in Canada. And if you forget everything else I say, I'd like you to remember the following 2 points. First, natural assets such as wetlands, forests, green spaces, and riparian areas are amongst the most valuable ones that we have and are central to any resilient infrastructure system. And secondly, that by understanding, valuing, and managing natural assets as core infrastructure, local governments can deliver vital services that they would otherwise have to deliver via engineered assets, and also receive a range of co-benefits, biodiversity, which Minister Wilkinson spoke of, being one of them. So to expand on this a little, wetlands and forests can store and absorb rainwater. That's their biological function. However, this can reduce flooding in place of engineered retention ponds and culverts. As another example, naturalized foreshores and coastal floodplains can protect against sea level rise. Furthermore, we're finding that natural assets can be managed very deliberately to ensure that they provide these services. But most local governments in Canada do not conceptualize natural assets as ones that can deliver vital services. Most local governments do not understand fully how much they depend on natural assets or how much it would cost to replace them, if they could even replace them, should they become degraded. Most local governments think about natural assets in terms of recreational or social amenities, and these are obviously very important. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but the approach leaves on the table a whole range of other services for which communities could be understanding, measuring, and managing their natural assets. And the result is that natural assets or ecosystems are often under-recognized and overused. And so there's a gap. And the gap is between the potential of natural assets and how most local governments are acting on it. And the gap matters for at least 3 reasons. First, local governments, pandemic or no pandemic, must continue to deliver core services on the back of an infrastructure, engineered infrastructure system that is aging, is characterized by deferred maintenance and needs renewal. Second, the status quo is often not delivering, and we don't need to look a whole lot further than recent flooding in New Brunswick, Courtenay, Grand Forks, Quebec, combined sewer overflows happening in many cities. I mean, some of this is starting to look rather Old Testament in many of our communities. And then thirdly, another consideration is that there's very few saviors. Local governments, they're getting squeezed. They have to manage about 60% of Canada's infrastructure. They get only about 12 cents on the tax dollar. On the other hand, climate change is creating more and crazier weather events and putting more pressure on the assets we do have. If you add all this up, it means the following, that if you have natural assets for which you have paid no capital costs and which deliver core services, you need to find ways to recognize and act and understand their full value. So how do we do this? Canadian municipalities are increasingly required to adopt modern structured asset management systems. The core idea of modern asset management is the idea of sustainable service delivery. This means that if I'm the director of engineering or finance or public works, I don't need to care whether an asset is engineered or green to deliver my services. I only need to know that the service is cost effective and reliable. And there's growing evidence that this asset management approach works very well for local governments and is in fact almost a made-to-order platform for understanding, valuing, and managing natural assets in ways that preserve their ecological integrity and accordingly the services they provide. And it is that understanding that is precisely what the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, the NGO with I am involved, helps local governments to do. The town of Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast was the first mover in this field that has become known as natural asset management. There's now 20 plus communities doing this. The number is growing. There's an important First Nations dimension to the work. I don't have time in these 3 minutes to do it justice, but I just want to lay that out there. The evidence base is not exhaustive, but it is certainly compelling. These communities, they're finding that natural assets have a high value. that they can be managed effectively using adapted asset management tools, and that they provide levels of service that meet or exceed whatever the standards are that we're talking about, and produce a host of other benefits. I mentioned biodiversity, but there are many others. I'll stop there. There's lots of work going on at an enabling and normative level, but that would take another 180 seconds. So I'll pause there.
Roy, thank you so much, and thanks to all of our experts for, I know it's challenging to fit all the great things that you're working on in 2 or 3 minutes, but this is when it gets exciting. You're going to have more opportunities to talk about the work you're doing, and you won't be answering questions from me. You'll get to engage directly with participants in our session. But I will say, you know, I'm so encouraged by your remarks. We've got such a diversity of perspectives, and yet the themes that continue to emerge in terms of the and proposition of nature-based solutions, the opportunity to enable economic prosperity, support ecological integrity, human well-being, address climate challenges, enable resiliency, safety in our communities. It's exciting to hear, and also as we begin to hone in on one of the central challenges or central sort of areas where we may want to take action in terms of how do we value these solutions, how do we create the markets for those. So with that, we are going to move to the interesting part of our program where we'll interact with our People's Panelists. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome our first People's Panelist, Connie Vanderbiel. Connie is the director of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability with Mount Royal University, and Connie is joining us now, and I'll invite you, Connie, to unmute your line and pose your question to our experts.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and my pleasure to ask a question of this very esteemed panel. As a business professor, I guess I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more and perhaps in more detail around the business case for investing in nature-based solutions. Thank you.
It's a great question, and I'm actually going to direct this to all of our panelists because I think each panelist in their own way will have a really great response. And I'd love, Denise, maybe I could start with you and Shell's perspective, just elaborating more on that business case for investing in nature-based solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the question, Connie. A really important one for us. So as I mentioned, you know, Shell, in order to meet our ambition, really needs to work with our customers in order to get to net zero by 2050 so that we can offer solutions to the market that meet that ambition. And nature-based solutions actually creates a business case for us through the carbon neutral fuels that we're able to offer to our customers using the carbon credits from nature. So, for example, in markets like the UK and the Netherlands, we offer carbon neutral fuels. When you fill up at the Shell gas station, you can either choose a particular, like the highest grade of gasoline, or choose to pay an extra €1 per liter in order to fill up carbon neutral. And we offer that we offer the fuel with the carbon credits that come from nature and our investments in these types of projects. And what that does for us is to create a business case for coming to Shell for, you know, that type of solution versus going to one of our competitors. And we've done this not just at the retail scale, but also for fleet customers, for other types of business customers. We've even shipped things carbon neutral in partnership with our customers. So we believe this actually creates not just lower carbon solutions, supports these types of projects, but provides us with a competitive advantage.
Thanks, Denise. Great hands-on example of that business case. I will say we are going to be going to the chat, so keep your questions coming. My colleague and partner, Toby, will be popping in as in between our People's Panelist questions to bring forward some questions from the chat. So, Toby, I know you're watching that chat, and we'll move there after we do this round of questions. So, Chief Slutt, I wonder if I could go to you next with this question about the business case. And I like this question for you because I know for your community and the communities you work with, it's much more than a business case. It's really about a way of life. And so I'd love for you to respond to that question.
Definitely. Thank you for the question. And, you know, I will answer through like a social responsibility lens. So everything comes from Mother Earth, and for us, it encompasses our social, cultural, spiritual, and also economic values. It's all linked. It's all part of our way of life. And we know and have heard, definitely from other First Nations and Indigenous people, that we are very much inherently close to the land and sea. And we see firsthand the ecosystem linkages more urgently. Right now I'm talking to you from Bella Bella, and we're on the central coast of British Columbia, and we see what's happening here. So by protecting the land and the trees and the oceans and the fish, we're really protecting ourselves and our communities. And if one wants a business term, nature is that asset base. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Slett. Beautiful. Aleister, I'd love to turn to you. You've created a business, based on this business case. So I'm sure you've got some great perspectives.
Well, Connie's posed a particularly complicated question because the answer really depends on the lens with which you view your return on investment. And while there's opportunities from a monetary perspective to invest in natural climate solutions in various parts of the world and make a reasonable return from a cash perspective, in Canada, I would argue that that's not really the case. In Canada, the opportunity to invest in natural climate solutions, to participate in the carbon market, there's barriers to that. There's significant barriers to that simply because we don't have a regulatory framework that allows us to create credits across the country in a uniformed manner. And hopefully we're going to get that through the output-based pricing system and protocols that are developed there. And with respects to initiatives on First Nations land, it gets a bit more complicated because of the traditional territories and the treaties, and then again, getting the rights to those credits from the federal government or perhaps other landowners. So it gets a little complicated. And I will point out there's work that we're doing with Nature United to figure that out and to look at what the opportunities are to see how we can make this a financially viable investment as above and beyond what's clearly the return from a social perspective, social development goals, and just what we need in terms of nature. So it's complicated. That's the right way to put it. It's simply just complicated.
Thanks, Aleister. Yeah, complicated space, absolutely, but value being huge. Roy, I'd love your perspective on the business case from where you sit.
So sure, probably slightly less complicated in the local government context. Local governments have to deliver core services. It's why municipal employees show up to work. And to provide one example, the town of, one of our earliest ones, the town of Gibsons needed more stormwater capacity to deal with a development that was upstream. And they looked at two options by which they could deliver the stormwater services. One was an engineered retention pond and culverts, would have taken around 4 kilometers of trunk line. They calculated the cost. The engineering costs was around $4 million capital to build it, plus operating. Then they said, well, what happens if we get these same services by better management of the forest? And did all the modeling for that, and that only took $800,000 for basically works in the forest. And that's an operating cost, so you don't have to borrow for it, you can just stretch it out over time. And so it doesn't work out necessarily that neatly every time, but the fact of the matter is natural assets we are seeing in more communities, A, have no capital costs, often have lower operating costs. Furthermore, they don't need renewal. Finally, if you build an engineered asset, in 50 years, you got to dig it out and renew it. A well-managed asset that is protected, taken care of, will get more valuable over time, and we can actually attach numbers to that, and saw that very clearly in places like the Credit Valley in Ontario. You know, a pipe doesn't get any bigger because it's rainy outside, but natural assets have an inherent resilience and can continue to deliver the services to the local government. And I'll conclude just by saying, bear in mind that those numbers that I'm giving for the community, that is just looking very narrowly with them as a beneficiary. Any natural asset, of course, has a whole suite of other benefits and services that accrue to other people, whether that's health or recreation or biodiversity, pollination, and so on. So, and you can add those numbers on as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Roy. Another great hands-on example of that business case. Connie, thank you so much for your question, for joining us this morning. And I'm going to go to a question from the chat. My partner and colleague, Toby, our partner in delivering this series, has passed a question. I love technology. We can do this so seamlessly. Passed a question for the panel from the chat. So a bit of an alternative view in terms of carbon credits. And the question from Guy Dancy asking, how can the use of carbon credits be justified when we need to reduce our emissions to zero and sequester those surplus 300 gigatons of atmospheric carbon? So how do we justify the use of carbon credits when we need to do those physical reductions and the sequestration? So maybe I'll open that up if any of our panelists want to take that one on. Denise, I see you've popped off mute, so I'll hand that one to you.
Yes, I do get this question a lot because of Shell, right? And people see the emissions from the energy industry and they're concerned about us using carbon credits. But I just want to say that we need not just carbon credits, but all of those other solutions that we talked about earlier. We need renewables, we need EVs to be rolled out, we need to look at biofuels, we need to look at many things. So carbon credits will get us part of the way there. Nature will get us a part of the way there. And investing in nature-based solutions projects gets you all those co-benefits that Roy and Chief Slett talked about earlier, and economic opportunities in areas that we inherently value as Canadians. So I don't see this as either or, and I really am concerned about the fact that people are so engaged in, well, what about this and what about that, which prevents us from actually taking action and doing something today. As we sit and talk about this and hum and haw and delay even further, we're further away from actually taking action. So I would rather do something that's a little bit imperfect but still considered, rather than not take action, if I can put it that way.
Absolutely, it's that yes and. Aleister, can I give you 30 seconds?
Yeah, I'll dive in and I'll simply say carbon credits aren't an outcome, they're a tool. And they're a tool designed to ease with the transition and also drive behavioral change. Because functionally what we're looking at to get to net zero is behavioral change across every way of life. So it is a tool to drive that change, and it's going to get us there. It's not the outcome in and of itself. Carbon credits aren't the outcome.
Great. Okay, in the interest of time, I want to move to our next People's Panelists. This is fantastic. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Spencer Chesson. He's Environmental Coordinator with the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. And so I'll welcome Spencer to join us as our next People's Panelist. And Spencer, if you want to pose your question for the group.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming from a more industry perspective, and my question is a two-parter, focusing on a carrot and stick metaphor of encouraging industry progress. So from the carrot side, what specific incentives are the best tools to speed up industry innovation and adoption of nature-based solutions in Canada? How do we make it standard practice instead of best practice? And on the stick side, is there a place for setting up basic requirements for nature-based solutions in permitting for infrastructure projects?
Great question on the heels of Aleister's comments about needing to change behavior. So thanks for that, Spencer. Maybe we'll start on that carrot side and thinking of that industry adoption piece. Denise, I feel like you might have an answer there.
Yeah, I certainly have a lot of passion for this. So on the carrot side, I think for Shell, this is how we've been approaching nature-based solutions and these investments. It's not as a regulatory requirement. It's not because we're being forced to, because we see that there is an opportunity here. And really what we need to invest is those structures that Aleister and I have mentioned earlier, right, is the regulatory framework and those protocols for investment in Canada. If those are in place, you have companies like Shell, and Shell is certainly not the only one that is willing to invest. Shell is planning to spend $200 million this year and next year on nature-based solutions. I would love to spend some of that money in Canada if we had the right frameworks in place.
Thanks, Denise. I want to flip to the second part of the question, that stick side, and who better to talk about the sticks to incent behavior than Aleister? Can I call on you?
Sure, I'll get up the baseball bat, right? I think that there's always a place for a regulatory stick to drive behavior. And I think what the challenges are when we're looking at incenting behavior, forcing behavior, is the balance into making sure that we're actually getting the outcome that we want. So if we're looking at something from an infrastructure perspective, if there was a regulation saying that the infrastructure project had to be carbon neutral, or it had to be net zero, and that investing in sustainable, in natural climate solutions was a way to make that claim, then you could drive that investment simply by requiring it to be carbon neutral or net zero, as opposed to saying if you build something, you must plant trees. And so you can give that stick approach, requiring it, but you can also provide flexibility as to how that investment in the natural climate solutions are made by the organizations that need to make them.
Great. Thank you, Aleister. Spencer, thanks for your question. Thanks for joining us. In the interest of time, I am going to move us to our next People's Panelists. I know we've seen lots of great questions coming in the chat. We are going to do our best. We obviously won't get to all those questions, but we will work with our experts after the session to see if we can't compile some responses to some of those key questions, because I know there's some really great ones and I think they'd be keen to respond. But I do want to move to our last People's Panelist. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Arshil Hirji. He's a leader of sustainable infrastructure with the City of Calgary. And Arshil, we'd love to hear your question for our experts.
Well, hello to everybody and good morning from the beautiful land we call Wilkinson, otherwise known as Calgary. My question to the panelists is really related to what role municipalities can play in nature-based solutions, keeping in mind while we have a plethora of different opportunities from afforestation to green infrastructure, we definitely can produce small amounts of reductions and the sum of which are great. So I'd really like to get some more details from the panelists on what role particularly municipalities can play. And if you could give an example, particularly around afforestation and urban forest management, that'd be particularly important to me.
Awesome question, and I think our panelists best suited for this one would likely be Roy and Chief Slett. So Roy, maybe we can start with you in the interest of time, sort of a minute or less of your thoughts, and then Chief Slett, and then we're going to look at wrapping things up so we can make sure we honor everybody's time today. So Roy, over to you.
So thank you. I think a first basic thing that all local governments should be doing, and really why wouldn't you do it, is to inventory all of your natural assets to understand their condition and the risks they face. This is a first fundamental step to municipal natural asset management. And again, I think everyone should do that. Second, I think local governments need to understand the value. This requires modeling, which we work with local governments on, but understand the value of those services and what their possible liability is if they don't, if the services were to cease to be available, and to start building in an understanding of that value into all decisions. Because make no mistake, even if you don't understand what your natural assets are or the services that they provide, you are still giving it a value. It's just implicitly zero. So you need to understand the real value of your natural assets. I believe that local governments should also be kind of modeling out and understanding different scenarios. What happens if I rehabilitate? What happens if everyone builds as of right? There's lots of operational scenarios that can be worked through. And then finally, there's lots of implementation options, details of which you can find on our website, but everything from the strategic to operations and maintenance to human resources changes, all of that is important. I would conclude though by saying local governments and the services they rely on from natural assets, they don't exist in a vacuum. Most local governments are also getting services from natural assets that are under the jurisdiction or ownership of others. And so you always need, to varying degrees, some degree of watershed scale collaboration. That's the only level at which this work really makes sense. And it's helpful to have the federal and other players at the table, many of whom also have substantial assets, like parks that are near cities, or in the case of the federal government, things like the Trent Severn Waterway, which runs near Guelph. So I'll pause there and say those are the four things I think they should be thinking about.
Awesome. And Chief Sled, I'd love to give you the last word on this question in terms of what can communities do from your perspective to see nature-based solutions further developed?
Well, thank you for the question. Certainly developing relationships and identifying the common interests and goals. I would advise municipalities to work directly with neighboring First Nation communities for joint solutions. All municipalities are located in a First Nations traditional territory, and all municipalities and First Nations are located in one or more watersheds. So these are common bonds to build upon, and there are things that, we can work together on, for those, solutions that we've been talking about here today.
Chief Slett, what a great message to end on in terms of that collaboration and the opportunity to work together. And so I do want to invite each of our panelists just in one breath, if you could summarize for us, what is one action? What's a next step that you see us needing to take to move forward in this space? And Roy, maybe I'll start with you. We're short on time, so like 10 seconds, call to action. Give it to us.
Do an inventory of your natural assets.
Awesome. Great call to action. Thank you. Chief Slett, call to action, next steps.
Find out more about what First Nations are doing with, this type of work in terms of stewarding and protecting their territories.
Fantastic. Thank you. Aleister, next steps, call to action.
Federal, provincial governments provide your staff with the money and resources required to create protocols and market frameworks, and do it fast.
Awesome. Do it fast, urgency. And Denise, to you, last step, last call to action.
So in addition to what everybody else has said, I would also encourage us all to tell our politicians that we support them taking these actions, and not to take too long to start moving forward.
Great call, because these are opportunities, there's the solutions that are available today. I want to offer so many thanks to our expert panelists for joining us today. As we prepare to part ways, I am going to throw that poll back up on the screen again that we started with, because I'd love to see if we shifted opinions. So if our tech support could throw that poll back up, are you feeling the same? While you're responding to that poll, I want to take the opportunity to thank our partners at Corporate Knights and Toby Heaps for working together on this event. Of course, Shell for supporting the event and our breakthrough series. I want to thank Minister Wilkinson for joining us and setting the stage, our People's panelists for their excellent questions, and once again, most importantly, all our expert panelists for taking the time out of your day to join us. Maybe we could pop those poll results up so we can just see as we part ways here today, where did we end up? And yes, extremely important, not a surprise to me, but so glad to hear that of the over 400 folks that joined us on the line this morning, that we share that feeling. So thanks for joining us. Just quickly, a couple more opportunities that you can join Corporate Knights and Globe Series in the next few months that I'll share with you coming up. We have a Globe event being put on by our partners Leading Change, connecting environmental employers with fresh talent across Canada. That's coming up on October the 21st. Our partners Corporate Nights have on Wednesday, October 28th, coming up a session on building back better together, a Canada and Europe Roundtable series. You can follow us on social media. You can check out our Clean Recovery Breakthrough series to see what's coming up next. Thank you again so much to our panelists, to Shell for your support. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.